The Forrester estate stood quiet beneath the Los Angeles twilight, its windows catching the last gleam of the fading sun, as if trying to preserve something of its former grandeur. Inside, the air was thick with tension and perfume, the scent of lilies from the retirement celebration that had been anything but a celebration. The great Eric Forrester, the patriarch who had shaped the fashion world for over half a century, sat alone in his study. The applause from earlier still echoed in his ears, hollow and cruel. Retirement. The word felt like an insult, not an honor. Ridge had insisted that it was time to step aside, time to rest, time to let the next generation lead. But for Eric, that suggestion had carried a deeper message. You are no longer needed. He stared at the sketches on his desk, trembling fingers tracing the lines of a gown he would never see come to life. They were more than designs. They were fragments of his soul. Yet now, those fragments felt stolen from him, pried from his grasp by the very son who once idolized him. Rage rose and fell within him like a fever. For years, Eric had given everything to Forrester Creations, his artistry, his marriages, his family, his health, and in return, he had built an empire. But legacies, he realized, were fragile things. They weren't inherited. They were devoured, consumed by those too impatient to wait their turn. The argument with Ridge earlier had been brutal. Words once restrained by love had torn free like shrapnel. Ridge had accused him of being stubborn, selfish, clinging to a fading past. Eric had accused his son of arrogance, of valuing profit over passion. And when it was over, Ridge had left with that familiar cold composure, the one that made Eric feel like a ghost in his own house. Now, as the clock ticked past midnight, Eric felt a strange pressure in his chest, not pain at first, but a slow tightening, as though the air around him were shrinking. He tried to stand, but his legs refused. The room tilted, colors blurring. For a moment, he thought it was simply exhaustion, the aftermath of rage. But then the pressure became agony, sharp and unrelenting. He reached for the phone but collapsed before his fingers could find it. When Ridge found him the next morning, the housekeeper's scream had already filled the halls. Eric lay unconscious on the floor of his study, his skin pale, his breathing shallow. The paramedics arrived swiftly, but the sight of the once mighty patriarch being lifted onto a stretcher broke something in Ridge. The man who had seemed invincible, who had survived betrayal, divorce, scandal, and heartbreak, now looked unbearably small beneath the sterile white sheets. At the hospital, the family gathered. Brooke, her hands trembling, Steffi, stone-faced but shaken, Hope, tearful and quiet, and Ridge, pacing like a caged animal. The doctors spoke in cautious tones, stress-induced collapse, heart complications, the body finally rebelling after years of endurance. He needs rest, the doctor said, and peace. But peace was the one thing the Forresters had never known. When Eric awoke hours later, his eyes fluttered open to the sight of his family clustered around him. His voice was faint, but still carried the authority that had built an empire. "Ridge," he whispered. His son stepped closer, guilt etched across his face. "I didn't mean," Ridge began, but Eric raised a trembling hand.
"No."
"Listen." There was something in his tone, urgent, fragile, final, that silenced the room. "There's something I have to tell you," Eric said, his voice rasping with effort. "Something I should have told you years ago." Brooke leaned in, her brow furrowed. "Eric, don't push yourself. I've lived long enough to know that some truths can destroy a family," he continued, ignoring her. "But hiding them destroys it more slowly." His gaze drifted toward the window, as if searching for courage in the pale morning light. "Forrester Creations, the company we built, was never what it seemed. And neither was our family." The room stilled. The monitors beside him beeped softly, the only sound breaking the silence. Ridge's voice was low. "What are you talking about?" Eric's eyes met his son's. There was pain there, but also relief, as though this confession was a burden he had carried for too long. "Years ago, before the company was ours, before I even met your mother, I made a decision that changed everything." Forrester Creations wasn't founded solely on my designs. It was built on money that wasn't mine to use. Brooke frowned. What do you mean? Eric took a shallow breath. There was a man, a silent investor. He believed in me when no one else did. But I believed in him too much. He was charming, ruthless, and he made me an offer I was too desperate to refuse. He provided the capital to launch Forrester Creations, and I promised him 10% of the company for life. But when success came, he wanted more control, influence, power. So I did what I swore I never would. Ridge leaned closer, his voice hoarse. You cut him out. Eric nodded weakly. I buried the contract, changed the books, paid him off through shell accounts, and kept his name off everything. When he died, I thought it was over. But, Brooke whispered. Eric's eyes darkened. But he didn't die without leaving something behind. A daughter. And she's been watching us. Waiting. She knows everything. A chill moved through the room like wind through an open door. Ridge's jaw tightened. Who? Eric closed his eyes, as if summoning her name cost him what little strength he had left. It was Jackie's daughter. Not from her marriage. Before that, I helped raise her for a time. I thought she'd never come back. But she's here, working under another name. She's been inside Forrester Creations for months. The realization hit Brooke first. You mean one of the designers? Eric nodded slowly. She has her mother's eyes. She wants what she believes I stole. Steffi's voice was barely a whisper. What does she want? Not money, Eric said. The truth. She wants to burn the lie that built us. And if she does everything we've built, everything will fall. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ridge stared at his father, his mind racing. A hidden heir? A buried scandal? The legacy he had fought so hard to protect now trembled under the weight of deceit older than himself. Brooke reached for Eric's hand, her voice breaking. Why didn't you tell us before? Eric's eyes filled with tears, the first anyone had seen in years. Because I was ashamed. I built an empire to give my children pride, but it was born from theft. I thought I could fix it, make it right through success, through love. But lies don't die, Brooke. They wait. His strength began to fade, his words trailing into gasps. The monitors beeped faster. Finn rushed in, summoning nurses. The family stepped back as Eric's breathing grew ragged. Dad, Ridge whispered, clutching his hand. Stay with me. Please. Eric turned his head slightly, his voice a whisper only Ridge could hear. You have to tell them the truth, son. Promise me. Then the monitor flatlined. The room erupted in chaos, doctors, nurses, voices overlapping, but Ridge heard nothing. His father's final words echoed through the void. Tell them the truth. When the noise subsided and the hospital quieted into its sterile calm, Ridge stood alone at the window, staring out at the city. The truth. The word tasted like ash. He knew his father's confession would destroy the family name, the company, the legacy. And yet, he also knew hiding it would destroy him. That night, he returned to Forrester Creations, the building dark except for the faint glow of the design floor. He wandered the hallways, his father's sketches still pinned to the boards, the echoes of their last argument lingering like ghosts. On Eric's desk, he found a sealed envelope with his name written in his father's unmistakable script. Inside was a letter and a small flash drive. My son, it began. If you're reading this, I am gone. The woman's name is Isabella Moretti. You will know her by another name. She joined our company under false pretenses, but her talent is real. I saw myself in her, and that frightened me. She knows the truth about the company's origins, and she has evidence that could destroy us. You can fight her, or you can face her. But if you choose to fight, remember that every empire built on deceit eventually collapses. Ridge closed his eyes, the weight of it pressing down like a physical force. He knew the name. Isabella had joined Forrester Creations a year earlier, a quiet but brilliant designer whose work had revitalized the brand. She had earned everyone's trust, even Steffi's. And now, he realized, she had been playing a far longer game. Days later, at the board meeting where Eric's will was read, the room was filled with unease. Ridge sat at the head of the table, his father's chair, the letter burning a hole in his jacket pocket. Brooke, Steffi, Hope, and the others waited, their faces taut with grief and confusion. When the lawyers finished, Ridge stood. "There's something you all need to know," he began, his voice steady but haunted. "Before he died, Dad told me the truth about how this company began." As he spoke, the room unraveled, shock, disbelief, denial. Brooke's tears fell silently, Steffi's hands trembled. Hope stared in mute horror. When he finished, the silence was deafening. Then the door opened. Isabella stepped inside. She was composed, almost serene, her dark hair gleaming under the light. "I see he told you," she said softly. "Good. Then you understand why I'm here." Ridge met her gaze, his father's legacy hanging in the balance. "What do you want?" he asked. Isabella smiled faintly. "Justice. And a name. The name that should have been mine." For the first time, Ridge saw the truth in her eyes. Not just vengeance, but pain. She wasn't there to destroy Forrester Creations for profit. She wanted to reclaim her identity, her family's stolen history. Yet, he also knew that giving her what she wanted would tear the company apart. And in that moment, he understood his father's torment, the unbearable choice between truth and survival. Outside, the sky began to darken again, the city's lights flickering to life one by one. Inside, the Forresters stood on the edge of collapse, their empire trembling under the weight of a confession buried too long. Eric Forrester was gone, but his shadow remained, woven into every stitch, every secret, every lie that had made Forrester Creations what it was. And as Ridge looked at the faces of his family, he realized that the story was far from over. It had only just begun, because the truth, once spoken, has a life of its own. Ridge stood at the head of the table, his father's words still echoing in his mind as Isabella's quiet defiance filled the air. The Forrester boardroom, once the heart of creativity and power, had turned into a courtroom of ghosts. Every wall, every sketch, every golden-framed photo of Eric seemed to lean in, demanding judgment. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning and the pounding of Ridge's pulse in his ears. "I don't want your company," Isabella said finally, her voice soft but steady, the tone of someone who had long rehearsed this moment. "I don't even want your money. What I want is acknowledgement. My mother died believing that Eric Forrester was an honest man. He wasn't. He stole from her. He built his empire on her designs, her passion, her sacrifices, and then erased her from history. All I'm asking for is the truth." Her words fell like shards of glass across the room. Brooke looked as though she had been slapped. Steffi stiffened, clutching the edge of the table, while Hope exchanged a silent glance with Carter. No one spoke. It was Ridge who finally broke the tension, his voice low, gravelly, like it had been sanded down by grief. "My father wasn't perfect," he said, his eyes locked on Isabella's. "He made mistakes, yes. But he also built something extraordinary, something that gave hundreds of people purpose, something that defined generations. He wasn't a thief. He was desperate. He believed in what he was creating." Isabella's expression didn't change. Desperation doesn't absolve deceit. "He buried my mother's name, Ridge. She was the ghost behind every collection, every runway, every headline that said Forrester Creations reigned supreme. Do you think she didn't deserve to be seen?" Ridge said nothing. He couldn't because somewhere deep down he knew she was right. Eric's confession had already shattered the image he'd built of his father as an unflawed visionary. To admit Isabella's truth would be to accept that the foundation of everything, the family, the business, the legacy, had been built on betrayal. Brooke rose from her chair, her voice trembling with a mixture of compassion and disbelief. "Isabella, we're all grieving. Eric's gone, and the company is barely holding together. If you truly want to honor your mother, maybe there's another way to do this, one that doesn't destroy everything he built." Isabella turned to her, her eyes flashing. You think I care about what he built? This company was built with her hands, her ideas, her love. You want me to protect his memory while hers is still buried in the shadows. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Ridge took a deep breath, forcing control into his voice. What exactly are you asking for? I want my mother's name restored to the history of Forrester Creations, Isabella said. I want her recognized as a co-founder, with full credit for her designs and her role in building the company. And I want every penny of profit earned from those stolen designs donated to the foundation in her name. Ridge's jaw clenched. You're asking us to rewrite 50 years of history. I'm asking you to correct 50 years of lies, Isabella replied. Steffi stood, her tone sharp. And if we refuse? Isabella smiled faintly, though the sadness in it cut deeper than anger ever could. Then I'll show the world what your father never wanted them to see. The original sketches, the contracts, the payments, everything. It wasn't a bluff. Ridge could tell by the calm certainty in her eyes. The weight of his father's final words, you can fight her, or you can face her, pressed against his chest like a curse. If she went public, Forrester Creations would be torn apart, its reputation reduced to scandal and shame. Give us time, Ridge said finally, his voice softer now. Let me find a way to make this right. Isabella studied him for a moment, then nodded. You have 48 hours. When she left, the air seemed to drain from the room. Brooke sank back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Oh my God, she whispered. Eric, what did you do? Ridge didn't answer. He walked to the window, staring out at the Los Angeles skyline. Below, the city pulsed with life. People walking, laughing, unaware that the empire above them was about to crumble. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat alone in Eric's study, surrounded by sketches, photographs, and the scent of old wood and leather. Every inch of the room breathed his father's presence. Ridge picked up one of the designs, a gown Eric had created in his early years, one that had launched Forrester Creations into international acclaim. The lines were familiar, elegant. But as Ridge studied them more closely, something gnawed at him. The signature in the corner was faintly smudged, almost erased, as if it had once belonged to someone else. Beneath the faint shadow of ink, a single word was barely visible. Isabel. Ridge's stomach dropped. It wasn't just guilt anymore, it was proof. His father hadn't exaggerated or misremembered, he had stolen. And now, the truth had come full circle, waiting to devour them all. The next day, Ridge called a private meeting with Brooke, Steffi, and Carter. We can't hide this, he said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. If she releases those documents, the media will bury us. But if we tell the truth ourselves, if we acknowledge what happened, we might survive. Steffi looked at him like he had lost his mind. Survive? You think admitting that Grandpa built this company on stolen work will make people forgive us? You'll destroy Forrester Creations. Dad, there won't be anything left to protect. Ridge turned to her, his gaze heavy. There's already nothing left if we keep living this lie. Brooke placed a hand on his arm, her eyes full of tears. Ridge, this isn't just about business. This will destroy your father's legacy. Everything he stood for. He looked away, his throat tightening. Maybe his legacy needs to be destroyed so something honest can rise from it. Carter exhaled slowly. Then we have to prepare a statement. And we have to do it before she does. Words spread faster than wildfire. Within hours of the press conference announcement, the media had already begun speculating: financial scandal, internal betrayal, corporate fraud. Reporters camped outside the Forrester offices, demanding answers. When the day came, Ridge stood at the podium, the cameras flashing like lightning. Behind him, Brooke and Steffi stood solemnly, their faces pale. The weight of generations pressed on his shoulders. My father, Eric Forrester, was a man of immense talent and vision, Ridge began. But he was also human. And like all of us, he made choices, some noble, some not. Today, I stand before you to share a truth that has been hidden for too long. He told them everything. About Isabella's mother, about the stolen designs, about the deal that had funded the company's beginning. Every word was a nail in the coffin of the myth the Forresters had built, but also a step toward redemption. Forrester Creations was founded not by one man, but by two artists whose dreams intertwined. We will honor both of them from this day forward. The reaction was instantaneous: shock, outrage, fascination. The fashion world erupted with debate. Some called it betrayal, others courage. Stock prices dipped, then steadied. And somewhere in the crowd, Isabella watched silently, tears glistening in her eyes. She had expected triumph, vengeance, vindication. But what she felt was something else entirely: grief. Later, when the building had emptied and the news crews were gone, Ridge found her waiting in the lobby. "It's done," he said simply. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "You did what he couldn't." "Maybe," Ridge said, "but it doesn't feel like victory." Isabella studied him for a moment, then handed him a small, worn envelope. "This was my mother's," she said. A letter she wrote but never sent. It was addressed to him. Ridge hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting was delicate, fading with age. "Eric," it began, "if you're reading this, then you've already chosen ambition over love. I don't hate you for it. I only hope that one day, when all the applause fades, you'll remember the woman who believed in you when no one else did, and that you'll tell our child who she really is." Ridge felt his chest tighten. For a moment, he saw his father not as the legend everyone revered, but as a man haunted by guilt and love. He folded the letter carefully, his voice barely above a whisper. "She deserved better. You both did." Isabella nodded. "Then maybe now, we can all stop pretending." The days that followed were a blur of damage control, interviews, and introspection. Forrester Creations weathered the storm, not unscathed, but transformed. The scandal had stripped away its illusions, forcing it to stand on truth alone. A new collection was announced months later, co-designed by Steffi and Isabella, titled Reclamation. It was raw, emotional, and daring, a reflection of pain turned into beauty. On the night of its debut, as the final model walked the runway and the audience rose in applause, Ridge stood backstage, the faintest smile touching his lips. The ghosts had not vanished, they never would, but for the first time, they no longer ruled him. He looked up at his father's portrait hanging in the hallway, the familiar proud eyes watching over them all. "You always said fashion is about reinvention," Ridge murmured. "Well, Dad, we finally did it. We reinvented the truth." And somewhere in that silence, beneath the glittering lights of the fashion world Eric Forrester had built and broken, there was the faintest echo of